Hello everybody, and I am Dredscythe, and welcome to Development Hell number 6, System Design in Diablo 4 Part 2 Feedback. Now, this blog aims to be much shorter than the previous one, and because we're just going to cover what the developers have given to us, and go from there. But before I touch on the blog, I actually want to go back just ever so briefly. This past week I was on the latest West March workshop from blissbo.com, and where I am the Diablo site manager, but the podcast is run by Nimewall, who is doing a lot of work on Diablo fans as well. And during the course of the 2.5-hour podcast, him and myself, which I knew beforehand we were going to be kind of butting heads, which is good. I mean, we're in a new game, we're giving feedback to the developers, there's many different perspectives that have to be handled and managed and compromised to. So it was expected, especially because as more and more systems and details come out, I'm beginning to notice that me being pretty much a Diablo 3 only player, I'm seeing things that may not reflect that per se, or at first glance may not, but a Diablo 2 player may recognize more clearly. But there may be other systems that is the exact reverse. Like, I'm like, okay, as a Diablo 3 player, I see exactly where this is coming from, and Diablo 2 players going, where is this coming from? And that's great. Many perspectives have to be taken into consideration, compromised on, and then put together to make the systems that will eventually be tested once either a new demo is released, whenever that is, let alone Friends and Family Alpha a year or two in the future, and then beyond that, a closed beta. All this is, as they say in politics, how the sausage is made. It's not the greatest. It's usually fraught with arguments and conflicts, but if done right, if respect is maintained, something great can come out of it. Usually better than if one or other side prevailed in that sense. But again, when I was on the podcast, I was kind of given a lesson in feedback. Not in general feedback, because we've been used to giving our opinions, like during Diablo 3 or Reaper Souls beta. We generally had the systems in place, we generally had the features in place, we generally knew if something was implemented, we knew more or less what it was. So we can kind of do a compare and contrast, or we knew how a system was prior to a change, and then after change we know how it worked, and we can do a A-B kind of comparison. So it was never really wrong to say, well, I view this as a problem because, and here's the solution I see. But with Diablo 4, we're in a whole new ballgame. We're basically in the conference room, something I've previously stated before. We're in the conference room with them as they're coming up with these ideas, and that the ink seems to be just barely drying, or the code seems to be just barely done as they're letting us see this stuff. And as I'll go as far as educated. It means that there's still a lot more unknowns than knowns. And probably the biggest offender in my previous development hell was the skill and skill point section. Not because I assumed too much, because I did put a disclaimer. I may be wrong, some of this information may be wrong, but I'd rather have assumed wrong information, still propose my idea, than not give it at all, because I still wanted the idea to have merit. Where Nimewall chimed in and said, well, if that's the case out of the way, why spend 10-15 minutes on a assumed problem, then just give the idea? And it was tough. It was actually really tough to hear that, because, you know, I want to be more of a voice of my ideas and other perspectives I hear, and to essentially be told, you're wrong. You're doing it wrong. But he was right. So going forward, I'm going to try my best to not assume everything is a problem. If I see something that could potentially be a problem, I will address it merely as I am just concerned about this, but I will try to leave it alone and just propose the idea. Because in the end, it doesn't do the community any service, nor does it do the developers any service, nor does it do myself any service to go on a long rant for 15 minutes and then propose the idea that I'm really excited about, and it feels borderline insulting. And I've always known that, and I've always tried to moderate that to the best of my ability. But I feel that it was important to address and to also give credit to not just a fellow Diablo 3 content creator, but also a friend as well for passing on that lesson. Because I feel in acknowledging that, hopefully I can pass it on to you, the community, to think about this a little bit differently, and also other content creators as well. So with that primary acknowledgement, we're actually going to get now into the feedback of the system design in Diablo 4 Part 2 blog. Now, this one was pretty much aimed at itemization as a whole, and whereas the first one was detailed things a little bit here, a little bit there, this one's pretty much about items in general, which is great because I said we're basically in the conference room, so these ideas, I don't know between when and when were developed, but it's great that we're still continuously getting this stuff out, especially when we were told quarterly updates, and this is the second one within a quarter since BlizzCon. That's amazing. Keep it up. It's not just an improvement, it's continuation of the improvement. I think we also have to acknowledge that in that particular way as well. So the first major update is for the affixes in Diablo 4. And it basically states that they're going to be increasing the amount of total affixes for magic, rare, and legendary items, which is great. That was something that looked a little bit slim or thin in the initial items they showed up at BlizzCon, where it's like 2 here, 3 there. It seemed like we were almost kind of letting ourselves in a situation where, like, whatever the most powerful affix was, you're going to get that, and only that, because if you only had 2 affixes to play around with on any particular item, it was kind of setting up a situation of min-maxing right from the beginning. So that's great to hear in general. Also, there's going to be 3 new stats, and in the way I'm going to describe them, and the way in my head, and to kind of keep clear for further discussions, is I'm going to call these power stats. And these power stats are angelic, demonic, and ancestral. And basically, they think of them as, or the way I'm thinking of them, is that when you add them up, they're kind of like a resource in a way. Not a traditional resource, but that's how I'm kind of viewing them. If you view it another way, that's up to you. But that's just how my brain is interpreting them in a way, that way. So the angelic power increases duration of all beneficial effects like self-buffing or healing. Demonic power increasing duration of all negative effects like debuffs, damage over time, dots. And ancestral power increases chance of on-hit effects, basically proc rates. So this is all great because it gives some more flair to the affixes. It's not just, +1 rank here for this skill, or +1 talent there, or your, what I'm going to call, standard affix pool, like your critical hit chance, your movement speed, life percent, stuff like that. Gives a little bit more flair. So as we go down, we see just 2 quick examples they gave to us, and we see more or less how exactly this works. You'll see the 15 angelic power, and then you see the power affix, which is +1 rank to devastation, requires 50 demonic power. So obviously, the this person who's wearing these boots doesn't have the 50 demonic power, but they're still getting, if they have that sat anywhere on their gear, they're still getting the passive ability from it, so you're still getting something from it, and then you can work your way to this. However, since they have the angelic power, that may have been just enough to get them over the threshold to get the 25% cold resistance, as well as gaining the passive ability from the angelic power. Now, when this system initially I saw it, I liked it, but my concern, I'm saying it's a concern, not a problem, was the increase our reliance on RNG. And I say the increased reliance on RNG because it's just an acknowledgement of, we don't know what the crafting situation is. We don't know if it's going to be high level crafting involvement in our items or low level involvement. Because we don't know if we're going to have anything like a Ramla's Cube, any and all the Kanai's Cube recipes in some discernible way. We don't know if the Mystic is going to be involved with our gearing process, if the legacy of all those and more are going to be brought over. So, in viewing that, my only concern with this is the RNG of gearing. And I know there's going to be a certain group of the Diablo community that would be ultimately fine with this. The more RNG on affixes, the better for them. And I can get that. I don't want to say that's an old school way of looking at it. But that may be a perspective, and that's very valid. But I think I'm from the group that understands RNG can be too much of a bitch if not curtailed, especially if it's more or less responsible and there's no real way of curtailing it. So the only thing I would suggest to maybe curtail that concern, but still pretty much keep the gearing intact and not make it dumbed down easy, is taking the power stat. So the angelic power or the demonic power is just move that particular stat to a new gem system to basically reinvigorate the purpose of gems, turn them essentially into sanctuary and batteries. And so that's why when we place those in sockets, it makes it a little bit easier to keep track of, like, okay, I have X amount of sockets, so I can kind of do this, and the gear is focused more on the affixes, and the gems are more focused on the resource, the power stats. And I only bring this up because even in D2, where stats were required for gear to equip it, you assign those stats through the character sheet, and then gear was separate on a different part of the character ragdoll, essentially. So they were made separate systems. It's not like they were intertwined into one thing. So that's my only concern, is that it's going to make RNG too heavy in the gear we get. But other than that, I do like the system. I like how there's still passive abilities from it. Hopefully, if you go from like 50 to 60, you can at least detect that increase in power with, of course, the skills that it affects. Because it would be bad if you went from like 40 to 60 and you didn't really see a measurable increase. But again, that's handled all out in testing. So overall, like the system, like how it gives us something new to look for, and just hope the RNG fest that this is curtailed a little bit. So moving along to the second part of the blog, the attack and defense changes. Now this one's actually pretty simple. What they did is they looked at what attack and defense were, and even at BlizzCon they were saying they wanted to get rid of the whole main stat VIT complex, because they felt that it was a more limiting factor than enabling factor. That if you got a really good piece of gear, but for some reason the smart loot rolled it in and you needed strength, it like broke the piece of gear, because since you can only re-roll one thing, especially if it was on a slot that you would normally keep the main stat, and you couldn't just roll it off, it kind of ruined that piece right from the get-go. So in kind of condensing the main stats to just the attack stat and then rolling and then making Vit essentially defense, that was the first step that they let us know about at BlizzCon. Now they're going even further and just saying attack is going to roll strictly on weapon, defense is going to roll on all pieces of the gear, except for the jewelry slots, which will roll won't roll either one. Now, from a logic standpoint, if we think in medieval times, a knight in shining armor, the armor was only defense. It was basically stop arrows and other swords from penetrating and hitting that nice little tender fleshy bits underneath the armor. So that's all pure defense. The only thing that was attack was a sword, a weapon. So from a logic standpoint, this actually makes more sense than the initial implementation. So with that, I'm on board. And it seems like it's further refining that while you will be able to use these stats as more or less a dumbed down indicator of what piece is at higher level, as they say, solely picking your items based on the attack and defense will almost never be the optimal play. They're getting there. They're basically there. Because the affixes, the legendary powers, and now with the power stat and the power affix inclusion with the previous section that we went over, those are going to be all the things we're going to be focusing on. I mean, we do that already in Diablo 3 for the most part. But now it's going to be more or less all that entirely in Diablo 4. And I'm all for that. Because having too many systems implemented, like if for some reason they actually had those main stats, and if they went back to stat allocation, going back that far, having too many systems micromanaging stuff eventually get to a point where the only people who get enjoyment out of that either have way too much time per day to do it, or they have way too much time to go on third-party websites and calculators, figure out what they're building, and then the game isn't the game because they've already figured it out on the calculator. The game is just basically plug and playing what they found on the calculator, which I can understand some people get enjoyment of, but that's not playing the game at that point, especially if you've predetermined everything. So we have to kind of bring the game back to a simple way of playing so we can enjoy it, and with a little bit more freeform on what we actually pick and choose to play. So overall for this section, the I would say small change that they did from the bigger change that they showed to us at BlizzCon, I'm all for. So, again, good. Let's keep on moving on down to the last section. Now, this is the ancient legendary replacement, and I feel this is a little misleading in a good way, because in my feedback, I took a stance of just getting rid of ancients altogether, because they were essentially a band-aid fix for the loot hunt in Diablo 3. It was basically to just extend out that loot hunt, give us, for the people who played long enough this season, something to shoot for. Which wasn't a bad thing for Diablo 3, but bringing that concept over in Diablo 4, it seemed like, how would they do that? Would they give us 2 legendary powers? So that would immediately outshine its legendary counterpart, and at the same time start detracting from mythics in general, because they had 4 now supposed to be their big claim to fame. So it would actually be doing double damage, diminishing legendaries and diminishing mythics. So what can I say is that they've come back, and now legendary powers will drop in consumable form at towards the late end game. I don't think we even have a concept of what that really is. I mean, we have endgame dungeons, but that was, if I remember correctly, was the first real stepping stone in the endgame process. There were other systems that they're thinking about, but just weren't ready to talk about or even describe in a sentence or two to us. But there are other systems at play. So it's probably going to be a little bit later than we would think at this particular moment. And these consumables will drop a random legendary power that we will then be able to affix to a rare item only, and be able to have essentially just that random legendary power on any rare item we choose. Initially, I was against the idea because what is a legendary item? Is in the context of Diablo 3. In Diablo 3, a legendary item is essentially a rare item with a legendary power, higher affix roll ranges, of course, but that's essentially what it is. So in my mind, it's like, especially because I'm coming from the Diablo 3 perspective of, we're trying to make rares matter by turning them into legendaries. I'm going like, how does this make sense? And then it wasn't until again the podcast where Nineball and myself were going back and forth on the idea, and another friend of ours, no one's minion, in chat brought up the idea of gear slot stacking. That's how I'm referring to it. There may be a better way of referring to it, maybe something from PoE that's a better terminology. But the best way of thinking about it is like this. Right now, with Kanai's Cube powers, we almost have a glimpse of this. Essentially, it's for like a Talraja Meteor build. You equip a Death Wish, but you have the Meteor Staff power in Kanai's Cube. What this essentially allows you to do is you can, in Diablo 4, you could say, to take a real life an example from Diablo 4, you could take the Staff of Fractured Flame, which turns your fireball into 3 projectiles, and then it does an X percentage damage each fireball. But if there's another weapon that does something with fireball, right now there's no Kanai's Cube, so you couldn't equip it. You couldn't get that legendary power. It would be an either or situation. However, with this system, you could, if you found that other weapon's legendary power in a consumable form, you could affix it to a rare that you could, if you could figure out what slot you could have a rare be placed into, and then you put that consumable on that rare, you now have the Staff of Fractured Flames effect, and you have the other weapons effect in consumable form affixed to a rare in the belt slot, or the shoulder slot, or the head slot, what have you. So this almost in a way kind of mimics, in some way, the Kanai's Cube power, but opens it up to any amount of, you can have any amount of weapon slots, any amount of gear slots, any amount of jewelry slots, as far as the legendary powers you want to equip. But it's also self-balancing, because it's not like we're saying, okay, you can fill your character all for legendaries, and then you can put a whole bunch of consumables with these legendary powers that are roll randomly, mind you, when you get them, because you can only apply them to rares. So you're going to have to make a power sacrifice. Do I keep a legendary? Because you may get to a point where you may have 6, 7, or 8 legendaries, and you're going to have to make a tough decision of, do I take a legendary out to put a rare in just to gain a different legendary power that I have in consumable form, or do I keep my current legendary? So it's self-balancing in that aspect, but it can open up really unique gameplay options that normally wouldn't be available to you. So in that conversation through different people's perspectives, which again is something. If I have to seek out something before I give feedback, is just try to get as many people's perspectives on the matter. I can throw almost all my weight behind this system now, because I just don't view it as why are we making rares important, because there's actually a purpose now. It's purpose driven. It's not just making rares. It's not just making rares great again, so to speak. With that stated, however, there's still just a general concern. What's going to be done for legendaries to still make them stand out? Because again, if a legendary is more or less a rare plus this consumable now, even if a legendary has one or two more affixes, that's not really defining. So I would just go back to my feedback in development helm number 5 and just propose the same exact idea to make legendaries still stand out, but not based on raw power, based on, and have it be based on gameplay options. And it's simply the developers would look at any skill-based legendary power and determine what other skills for that class could fit those legendary powers. So I know I use the Staff of Fractured Flame as a good example, but that's because that's one of the only few legendaries that we know about, and I'm a general wizard, magic-y, sorceress kind of fan. So I apologize. So in this example, the consumable form of the Staff of Fractured Flame power would only be Fireball. It's locked in the Fireball. So if you get it, you know it's Fireball. You put it on something, that's it. However, the legendary, even though it starts off as Fireball, to keep the fantasy of the item, so when you find it, it still feels grounded in the Diablo 4 universe. You could go to a crafter and you could switch out Fireball for Frostbolt or Lightning Spear. Any likewise ability, again, developers would determine that. And that legendary item would potentially open up new avenues of gameplay. It would go to the heart of the mantra, simple to learn, hard to master. Because now this legendary says, okay, you get this basic effect, but now you can put on Frostbolt. And now if you use a couple of Frost pieces of legendary gear, if you know you could swap out skills through theory crafting or just looking at what you have, you could come up with a totally unique build that fits you, that can surpass what we're going with this. If you went from a fire build to a frost build, or any build to this new build. So I think having that skill-based legendary power replacement through a crafting for just legendaries would give legendaries a more unique one-up over a rare plus legendary consumable, but it wouldn't be based on power, because I think we all want to avoid power being the sole difference between items. We want to get away from this whole power creep mentality. So other than that minor concern, again, I can rally behind this idea. And again, I have to acknowledge it only happened because I seeked out different perspectives. And I feel as we go down, we see that more feedback section there. Because I seeked out that all those new perspectives from a wide variety of people, we were able to see the potential of this, and that changed my mind. And that's really important, because a lot of people, as I stated in the precursor, says, well, we have to wait and see. For any other time in any part of Diablo's development, which did Diablo 3, Reaper of Souls, Necromancer, any of the PTRs, that may be okay, but right now they're asking for it. So why are we gonna wait to give our feedback when it may be too late before these systems get baked too much and then becomes infinitely more difficult to change them around? So I'm just gonna end this by saying, have your opinions, stick up for your opinions, but gather other people's perspectives along the way and see how they work conflict with your own. Question your own ideas in some respects and see if you can come to a better overall conclusion and then put it forward one way or another. I mean, I'm doing this now, but believe me, I'm still nervous every time I do one of these videos, every time I put my feedback through, as well as I'm willing to bet a lot of the other content creators are. But still do it. And who knows, maybe you'll find other people along the way that agree with you that you normally that you thought normally wouldn't agree with you. So other than that, hope you enjoyed this much shorter feedback. Hope you got something out of it, new perspectives for you. If you want, you can get in contact with me through Twitter at Dredscythe. And you can also leave comments on the video, and if I see comments or questions, I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. So with that, again, hope you enjoyed. Have a good night. See you next time, folks.